for the prosecution? Should they have charged all of this differently? Is it hurting them to have overcharged this case?
Well, I mean, I think yes, yes, and yes, to the extent that you never want to be a prosecutor who filed a bunch of charges and then has some of those charges thrown out and then also is almost tossed off the case
Right.
based on a hearing related to conflicts of interest. Now, whether or not this indicates that if this case goes forward, if the rest of the case goes forward, that Fani Willis can or can't win, that's a different question. But look, who the prosecutor is, the decision she made, both in her personal life and with respect to the charges that were filed, is allowing Trump to have these pre-trial wins.
So, Jessica, there are still other charges that face the former president and his co-defendants. What about those charges? What remain? How serious are they?
Well, they're serious charges. They are, again, state criminal charges that in many ways are the state mirror of the federal charges in the DC election interference case. And the state charges deal with trying to basically improperly undermine the results of the election in Georgia. But the way, as I remember it, the way that the case is charged, it actually allows the prosecution to sweep in actions by others by saying that there was this organized conspiracy to undermine the results in Georgia. So for this case, again, the basis of it has to start with Georgia. And a big part of the case could be, to refresh a lot of people's recollection, that famous phone call between former President Trump and the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, where he's saying to Brad Raffensperger, can't we just find 11,000 plus votes? But it's not just that call, it's other actions. Now, at the risk of overly complicating things, that's the part of the case that's going to move forward. But I do want to remind everybody that in June, the Supreme Court came out with that big immunity decision where they said when it comes to a former president or a current president, you are immune from criminal prosecution for actions that fall within your official duties. And part of the Georgia case is going to have to be sifting through, just like the judge in the DC case, sifting through which potential charges cannot move forward because of immunity issues.
All right. We're going to put a pin in that as I bring in CBS News campaign reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman, who is following this case for us, as well as the Trump campaign. Katrina, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about what we have been hearing in the past about these cases, as well as all of the legal troubles that the former president has been facing, and how all of that's been playing out on the campaign trail.
You know, I've been out talking to people at Trump's rallies, and what's interesting is I think that his rhetoric about his legal troubles really resonates with them. They see these as him being politically persecuted by the Democrats, the fact that he's been convicted on 34 felony charges in New York really doesn't seem to be swaying their vote or impact their perception of him.
So if the former president being convicted doesn't affect them, does the fact that these charges are being thrown out, previously we saw that happen, and we're now learning of additional charges being thrown out, does that vindicate in their minds what the former president has been saying?
Absolutely. I think that Trump frames these as a win. And what's important here is that, you know, this is not the judge dismissing these charges on the merits. He's not saying that due to the facts of this case that these charges can't be brought. As you and Jessica were talking about, he's just saying that this is the wrong forum. These are not charges that should be brought by the state. These are charges that should be brought in federal court and assessed there.
And Katrina, we're talking about how these cases have also come in a very odd twist as the former president is both running for re-election and denying the election results that happened in 2020. We've heard more of that on the campaign trail recently. what is happening in terms of reconciling the president or the former president running now for office again with, as just a reminder, with some of these cases as well as sentencing and how some of that has been pushed because of the election?
Yeah, so we were actually supposed to have a sentencing in the New York criminal case against Trump coming up that was going to be on September 18th. And just last week, we got a very significant decision from the judge, Juan Merchan. He has decided that he's pushing the sentencing until after the election. And even though, these judges say they don't want to take politics into account when they're weighing these cases, he just said that he felt as though he didn't want to seem as though he was influencing the election in any way. So that date is going to now happen later in November. He's also weighing a very significant appeal by Trump to overturn that conviction altogether on the basis of the Supreme Court's immunity ruling. Trump says that based on that immunity ruling, all 34 counts that he was convicted of should be thrown out. But it's important that the judge pushed that decision too. We were going to get it on September 16th. Now we won't find out until November 12th. So Trump will still go into this election as a convicted felon.
All right. As you can see there for all of our viewers, we are watching to see when Trump is going to hold that campaign rally. Let's bring back Jessica Levinson. Jessica, as you heard Katrina talking about that immunity ruling that came down from the Supreme Court, and in some ways the vagueness of it, allowing all of these lower court judges some leeway in trying to interpret what the Supreme Court means by presidential immunity. How is that expected to play out?
Well, we're looking at the first judges in the nation who are going to have to apply this new standard. And let's be clear, this happens all the time with Supreme Court cases where the court will hear a case and it's a matter of first impression. It's a constitutional issue. And they say, OK, here's the standard. Now go and apply it. And history indicates that that can sometimes be bumpy. The difference is a lot of times you and I don't talk about it because it doesn't involve a former president, a current candidate, and pending legal charges that could potentially have huge historic implications for our country. So the fact that they laid out the standard that needs interpretation, that's how it goes with the Supreme Court. That's my bread and butter in class talking to students. Mm-hmm. The fact that we need these judges to interpret it, I mean, that is a lot of work for them. For Judge Chutkan, the federal judge in the D.C. election interference case, for Judge McAfee in Georgia, not as much for Judge Merchan in New York. I think those charges will stay.
Jessica, one last question for you. Why now? Because as I was saying, back in March, Judge McAfee tossed out other charges, calling them overly broad. It's not like anything changed with these charges in terms of what he's finding fault in. Why announce this now? Why decide now that these should have been filed federally?
So the answer, I'm going to say, I suspect, is based on when these motions were filed, when the oppositions came in, the reply, and when he ultimately came to his ruling. There may be something else, I want to be transparent, in the court's calendar that dictated the ruling this way. But one thing to keep in mind is not all motions are typically filed at the same time, and judges have enormous discretion as to when to make decisions. And based on what we see generally from these judges, they're not trying to make decisions based on where we are in the electoral calendar. They're trying to make those decisions based on where they are in their court calendars.
Helpful in understanding all of it. Jessica Levinson, as well as Katrina Kaufman, thank you both. We are going to take a short break. Up next, we're going to talk about a huge shakeup atop the New York City Police Department, as well as former President Trump saying there will be no further debates. Stick with us. You're streaming CBS News.
These are the stories
1, 2, 3, go!
of We the People.
We're trying to generate our own hope.
It's a huge deal.
I'm enabling them to feel valued.
Eye on America. Weeknights on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper